The U.S. can be considered multi-religious from the beginning due to religious freedom serving as a pull factor for settlers and immigrants, thus producing a more diverse society in terms of faith. Britain, on the other hand, has mainly been a Christian-dominated society, and religious pluralism was not a feature of British society until after the Second World War and the arrival of more diverse newcomers. Consequently, as John McCormack points out, quote, one of the most notable trends in British religion in recent years has been its growing diversity, unquote. Generally speaking, religion plays only a marginal role in British society, just like it does in most of Europe. Religious affiliation is usually weak, although most Britons tend to state one. Attendance at church is seldom more than occasional, but most Britons still choose to get married and baptize their children in church. Critics like Davy have therefore argued that a new habit pertaining to religion has developed in Britain, believing without belonging. This can be illustrated by the figures of the Church of England. 26 million Britons stated a religious affiliation and identification with the Church, but less than 2 million Britons are active in the Church on a regular basis. According to Davy, this does not indicate that the belief in a God is challenged in British society, but rather that participation in organized religion has been challenged and that religious practice has found other venues. On the other hand, increased secularization is also evident in British society, with 25% stating that they have no religious affiliation and 7% not stating a religious affiliation. Overall, fewer than 1 in 5 Britons participate in religious activity in any kind of sustained manner. The notable exception to this tendency can be found among Britain's so-called new religions, such as Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhism, brought to Britain by newcomers since the Second World War. According to McCormack, quote, not only is support for these religions growing quickly, but their followers generally have a stronger sense of identity with the faith, unquote. Increased multi-religiosity, coupled with increased secularization, can thus be considered main characteristics regarding the position of religion in Britain today. For centuries, the British have been predominantly Christian, the only notable divisions being between the churches of England and Scotland and between Protestants and Catholics. But the arrival since the 1950s of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent has brought more Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus to Britain. While active adult participation in Christian religions has fallen by more than 1/3 since 1970, the number of Hindus has doubled, the number of Sikhs has quadrupled, and the number of Muslims has quintupled. There are now more than 1,000 Muslim mosques in Britain, more than 200 Sikh temples, and more than 140 Hindu temples. Unfortunately, the diversity has brought social tensions, in part because these new religions are identified with ethnic minorities, and thus are an element in the racism that has become a feature of society in Britain, and in part because of the broader conflict between Muslims and the West. Please review these two figures and what they reveal about the role of religion and religious values in British society. State and church are not separated in Britain. The Church of England is the established church, meaning it is the national religion. Consequently, the monarch appoints the leaders of the Church of England and is its supreme governor, referred to as the defender of the faith. Furthermore, the leaders of the Church of England, 24 senior bishops and the 2 archbishops, are entitled to serving in the House of Lords as Lords Spiritual, giving them a position of influence far beyond other religions in Britain. Additionally, British schools teach a compulsory religious subject in school emphasizing Christianity, which has caused some controversy regarding whether this violates the principle of religious freedom. With Britain becoming increasingly multicultural and multi-faith, the debate about current arrangements involving religion has experienced a renewal. Recently, the blasphemy laws were changed, in part to accommodate the changing composition of Britain. British blasphemy laws only protected the Church of England from libel, meaning that derogatory remarks or insults and attacks on the Protestant faith were illegal. This was a source of conflict in connection to the Rushdie affair. Salman Rushdie, an Anglo-Indian author, was accused of blasphemy against Islam with his book Satanic Verses, and British Muslims demonstrated against this book in 1989. They also called for prosecution of blasphemy against Rushdie, but the law only recognized the Anglican Church. In fact, British blasphemy laws did not even protect all Christian denominations from libel, leading to a debate about whether these laws were out of date. Opponents of the law argued that blasphemy laws should either protect all faiths or no faiths, and that the existing legal frameworks were, quote, plainly discriminatory, unquote. Either the law had to be extended or the state should withdraw from blasphemy laws completely, according to opponents. In May 2008, the blasphemy laws were consequently abolished. Where should the line be drawn between free speech and attacks on religious beliefs? According to Edward Lee, a Conservative MP, for instance, abolishing British blasphemy laws, quote, would encourage more people to make fun of Christianity. Getting rid of the blasphemy laws sends a message that it is okay, but it is insulting to many Christians, unquote. What do you think about blasphemy laws and criticism or ridicule of faith, such as the cartoons of the Prophet of Muhammad? Prince Charles has also advocated a change for the monarchy in connection with religion, stating that the monarch should be the protector of all faiths, not the defender of the faith. Despite these debates and challenges in multi-faith society, discrimination based on religion has been illegal since 1829, when religious freedom was established. And some critics argue that the link between state and church is not as prominent or problematic as its opponents argue. McCormick argues that the formal link between church and monarch, for instance, draws attention away from any overlap between church and elected government. Quote, the religious views of elected members of government are not usually a matter of public debate, and it is almost unheard of, in recent times at least, for the religion of a prime minister to be an issue of public debate. This was true even of Tony Blair, who unusually was quite open about his Christian beliefs. In policy areas where religion might play a role, such as abortion, the teaching of religion in school, or euthanasia, there is almost no overlap between religious values and government policy, unquote. Still, there is a difference between legal frameworks and realities of discrimination, and it can be argued that giving one religion a more prominent position than others is counterproductive in a multi-faith society. What do you think? The 2011 census showed that there were 2.7 million Muslims living in Britain, and that Muslims were the largest religious group after Christians. British Muslims accounted for 5% of the total population and over half of the non-Christian religious population. The first mosque was opened in Britain over 80 years ago. Today, there are over 1,000 mosques, illustrating that the growth of British Muslims is a recent development. As with former newcomers that stood out from the general population, such as Jews in the early 20th century or West Indians in the 1950s, British Muslims have met concern, fear, and ignorance due to their visibility and experiences with terrorism and fears since 2001. It's easy to label individuals as part of a unified group, not taking individual variations into account, and that is also the case for people belonging to a particular religious group. The most visible members of the Muslim community are the conservative or fundamentalist Muslims, who tend to be more outspoken than moderate Muslims, and who are given more attention by the media. Still, it is important to avoid generalizations when examining British Muslims, who form a very diverse group, not only based on their religious views, but also in terms of their country of origin or period of residence in Britain. Some members of Britain's Muslim community have reacted angrily to what they see as attacks on their religion. In 1989, there were demonstrations against Salman Rushdie's book Satanic Verses, and in 2006, some Muslims protested against cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. More extreme Muslim views were obvious in the London terrorist attacks on July 7, 2005, which were committed by young British Muslims. Quote, the group, consisting of outwardly unremarkable young men, was motivated by fierce antagonism to perceived injustices by the West against Muslims and a desire for martyrdom, unquote, according to the BBC. Why are conservative or fundamentalist Muslims more outspoken than moderates? Why do the media focus more on these sections within the British Muslim community than on liberal or moderate Muslims? How should society respond to a fundamentalist Muslim? What do you think is the reason why such extreme and anti-British or anti-Western views and attitudes develop? Religion has historically played an important role in the US, and it continues to be central in American society today, indicating that there is a more fertile soil for religion in the US compared to Britain and other Western countries. As Russell Duncan et al. Point out, quote, usually the more technologically advanced the country becomes, the more religion is downgraded, unquote. The US, on the other hand, which has both modernized and globalized, has not seen a decline in religion. Rather, religion remains a growth industry. In comparison, there are more places of worship and more people stating that they are religious in the US compared to Britain. In a 2004 poll, almost 80% of Americans stated that they have always believed in a God, whereas in a similar poll in Britain, less than 45% said the same. Still, there is lower formal membership in the US than in Britain, since no state or national church has been established. There have been experiments with government-established religion at times, such as the Puritans and Pilgrims in Massachusetts, the Anglicans in Virginia and Georgia, the Jesuits in California, and the Mormons in Utah. But, quote, American history is punctuated by religious freedom, unquote. Duncan et al. Explain the clear separation between state and church. The mixture of large numbers of believers of different faiths has demanded tolerance and helped persuade the founders to state in the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Established religion in a country of immigrants would endanger the survival of the nation, and the founders therefore allowed neither government establishment of nor interference with religion. The separation between state and church must also be seen in connection with the experiences of religious persecution many American newcomers had seen in the Old World. They associated established religion as seen in Europe with authority, oppression, class, and hierarchy, and believed this to be undemocratic and in violation of the principles of the New World. This separation between state and church, coupled with strong religious affiliations, make the US both remarkably secular and remarkably religious. This is also illustrated in the civil religion evident in American society, which goes beyond individual affiliation. American civil religion is the notion of a broad umbrella religious belief, visible in national culture and identity. This is illustrated by national symbols like the Constitution, on bills and coins, and the belief in exceptionalism. As Duncan et al. Explain, the country's semi-official motto, In God We Trust, is located on every piece of currency, and the Pledge of Allegiance has long included the words, One Nation Under God. The US military employs chaplains and builds churches on military bases. Religious groups are supported by having tax-exempt status. All of this seems clearly contradictory to the historical American rejection of an established religion, as does the continuing tradition of lighting a Christmas tree on the White House lawn, even though Congress cannot sanction any religious holiday. Presidents are often photographed praying or attending church services. In other words, the First Amendment ensures freedom of, not from, religion, which remains a central aspect in American culture. According to Wolf, Americans generally practice a quiet faith, are non-judgmental, and, quote, acknowledge the fundamental right of all individuals to believe in the God of their choice as long as they abide by the law, unquote. Duncan et al. Refer to this as a classic Enlightenment view of tolerance and non-interference in the lifestyles of other people. Consequently, open religious prejudice is rare, since Americans have so-called faith in faith. And a 2008 poll illustrates this. Quote, Half of all respondents said that belief in any religion could lead to eternal life, and that even atheists could go to heaven, unquote. In short, religion in the US is laissez-faire, which is in line with American views and values seen in relation to social and economic policy. At the same time, there have been periods of widespread revivalism or evangelicalism aiming to turn people back to God. In 2008, over 50% of American Protestants defined themselves as evangelicals, hoping to, quote, bring sinners back to Christ, unquote. The rise of the Christian right in recent decades has also been a factor in this revivalism, and former presidents Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush were closely linked to this movement. As Duncan et al. Explain, conservative Christians, reacting to the social upheavals of the 1960s and the anxiety of a globalizing post-Cold War world, increased by the terrorist attacks, have created an interfaith cooperative under the general idea of social action by a Christian right. These conservatives have joined with fundamentalists to elect politicians more favorable to their beliefs, to ban abortion, to allow prayer and the teaching of creationism in public schools, to make it unconstitutional to burn the American flag, to return power to the states by reducing federal taxes, and to get the government out of the so-called welfare business. In addition to this role of religion in the political realm, evangelicalism represents a competing pull on the position of religion in the US, with flexidoxy becoming more common as a result. David Brooks defines flexidoxy as, quote, the hybrid mixture of freedom and flexibility on the one hand, and the longing for rigor and orthodoxy on the other, unquote, and argues that this is a significant factor in what Americans seek in religion. Please review these two figures and what they reveal about the role of religion and religious values in American society. Due to the separation between state and church, religion is considered a private matter in the US. In reality, this distinction is perhaps not quite as clear-cut, especially with the influence of religion in politics and the ongoing debate about the role of religion in schools. Religious freedom was established in the First Amendment, 1791, and equal protection in the 14th Amendment, 1868. Still, religious discrimination and prejudice have been present in American society, and religion is an area where integration has been difficult. As Duncan et al. Point out, quote, even with the gains in equality and societal acceptance by minority groups, American churches are, with a few exceptions, not multiracial. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. said that 11 o'clock Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. In 2009, this is still overwhelmingly true, unquote. Some minorities have managed to gain economic prominence, social acceptance, and political influence, such as Catholic Americans. Another example are Jewish Americans, which are, quote, the most influential Jewish group in the world, unquote. Their position in the US can be illustrated by widespread intermarriage to Christians and their powerful lobbying for Jewish concerns regarding US foreign policy. Furthermore, the political impact and integration of Catholic and Jewish Americans can be illustrated by their election success, as exemplified with the 2009 Senate. In addition to holding 13 Senate seats, Jewish Americans also held 30 seats in the House of Representatives in 2009, whereas Catholic Americans held 136 seats in the House, in addition to 25 Senate seats. In the history of the executive branch, Catholic Americans are the only non-Protestant group to successfully run for the presidency, with John F. Kennedy the first and only non-Protestant president. Furthermore, when Elena Kagan was sworn into the U.S. Supreme Court in August 2010, Jewish Americans held 3 seats and Catholics held 6 seats in the federal judicial branch. This means that the Supreme Court since 2010 has had a unique composition compared to the past, quote, something that would have been unimaginable a generation or two ago, a court without a single member of the nation's majority religion, unquote. This is an indication that religious equality and integration has come a long way in American politics. On the other hand, some religious minorities are struggling with finding both social acceptance and achieving political influence, such as American Muslims. Describing or assessing the experiences of Muslim Americans as one group is a complicated task. As a study conducted by Gallup in 2009 revealed, Muslim Americans are the most racially diverse religious group surveyed in the US, with African Americans making up the largest contingent within the population at 35%. Please read more about Muslim Americans in the UNIS article in your compendium. Islam has grown from having 52 mosques in 1945 to approximately 3,000 mosques and Islamic centers and 200 schools in 2001, located throughout the 50 states of the US. The total population of Muslim Americans was estimated to 5 million in 2008, illustrating a recent growth of this minority in the US. According to Duncan et al., a majority of Muslims say that since 9/11 it has been more difficult for them because of prejudices, being seen as part of Al-Qaeda, general ignorance about Islam, stereotyping, and increased religious profiling by government agencies. Compared to the figures from Congress in 2009 above, the difference in political influence is also prominent. No Muslim American has ever served in the Senate, and only 2 have been elected into the House of Representatives, both serving in 2009. The diversity of Muslim Americans is not only limited to their country of origin, but also to their attitudes based on either liberal, moderate, or conservative religious beliefs, and to variations of the Islamic faith, just like the global Muslim population. The majority of Muslims in the US are Sunni, but there are also significant numbers within the Shia and Sufi traditions. According to Paul Barrett, author of American Islam, The Struggle for the Soul of a Religion from 2007, despite this diversity, quote, the distinctions that possibly loomed larger elsewhere are instead in America diluted in the deep pool of pluralism that characterizes American society. Many immigrants have taken the ambitious step of crossing continents and oceans because they want to escape old world antagonisms, to pursue education, economic betterment, and a more hopeful life for their children, unquote. The uniquely American Islam that is rapidly evolving therefore has more progressive forms of belief and a more prominent role for women compared to old world Muslim communities outside the US. An Islamic center was proposed in New York City, not far from Ground Zero, which is where the terrorist attacks on 9/11 took place. Advocates of the center argued that it would help promote integration and understanding of American Muslims, whereas opponents argued that the construction of an Islamic center in such a symbolic place was not appropriate. Not only that, they feared that it would spark even more anti-Muslim sentiment in the US, and that an Islamic center near Ground Zero was thus counterproductive. What do you think about the building of an Islamic center near Ground Zero? How far should society go in adapting to and accommodating religious views of minorities?